So, hello, I'm Gina Blaxill. I am the author of All the Better to See You in all of its shininess, which is a Red Riding Hood retelling, sort of a whodunit, definitely pretty dark, shock at the end, which I will do my best not to spoil for you. You must stop me, Charlie, if I go near that territory.
It's an emotional ride, this book. I loved it, whilst my emotions were pulled on a ride that was very stressful and painful, but it was like the ending is incredible, and well worth all the emotional ride throughout the book. But yeah, I won't say any more than that because I don't want to spoil it either, because he's just so good.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I guess my first question would be kind of, what was the inspiration behind writing All the Better to See You? Obviously it's got the Red Riding Hood theme going through it, but I was wondering if there's any other kind of like nuggets of information and inspiration that you could tell us about.
Oh, so I have a kind of crime background, as in, not that I'm a criminal who regularly commits crimes, that started off wrong, but I've always loved whodunits, criminal stories, detectives. I mean, my favourite author, not a YA author, is Agatha Christie. So I guess the idea of kind of applying this whodunit structure to a fairy tale was quite appealing, because on the face of it, they're two things that really don't go hand in hand. I mean, the whole idea that in the book, the big bad wolf has started attacking people, and Red Riding Hood and the other characters are kind of trying to work out who's doing it. That's sort of a classic crime framework. So I guess that really attracted me, applying it to something in a way that you might not foresee. So yeah, a little bit quirky, I guess.
No, I think it works so well. I mean, it's so, when you read it, they so obviously mash together those themes. They work so well together, kind of who what is the wolf and why is it happening, does kind of follow that like classic who's done it crime scenario, and it worked incredibly well, and it was such kind of like a refreshing take on it as well. um I really enjoyed it. I must say I do love a good true crime documentary as
Oh,
well.
brilliant.
They appeal, they appeal to me in that kind of way that you're like, I shouldn't admit how much I enjoy watching true crime documentaries. I promise I'm not a criminal. It is that like, it's the discovery and kind of trying to pull clues together, which works so well in this book with the kind of fairy tale element, which leads really well into the next question, which is, how do you go about creating a retelling of kind of such a well-known tale whilst ensuring you kind of like keep it really engaging to the reader, in that they know it's not, they know the overarching inspiration, but they don't know what's going to happen in this book, and kind of put your own spin on it? Because I can imagine it can be quite difficult taking some, or quite worrying taking something that's so kind of well known and putting your own spin on it. I think that would terrify me. I mean, I'm not a writer, I couldn't write anything from scratch anyway, but I think I'd feel a little bit of pressure taking something that well known and putting your own twist on it. So how did you go about kind of doing that?
Oh, I'm glad that I didn't really overthink that part, because I didn't have time to sort of feel the pressure at all. Um, and I guess with this, in a way, it's almost easier in some ways when you're retelling something as opposed to coming up with something fresh. Because with Red Riding Hood, for instance, there are various components are part of the story. So there's a girl in the red cape who goes into the fearsome woods. She doesn't stick to the path. There's a wolf, her granny's in the woods. And then you've sort of got periphery characters that are readable, know is important. Like there's the woodcutter who in some versions of it, after the wolf has eaten Red Riding Hood and their granny, cuts the wolf open and they just sort of spring out untouched, which defies science.
Yeah.
So he's quite an interesting figure because you know he's important, but you can do whatever you like with him. And I've done something a bit different with the woodcutter in this bit. So I guess for me, it was a case of identifying the components that I knew had to be in the story because they're within the classic version of the fairy tale that everyone knows, and playing with them a little bit within the framework of a whodunit. So in a way, it was great because for someone being a little bit lazy, you've already got some plot elements that are just laid out there for you, but you can just do something a bit different with. So for me, yeah, I actually found it smoother than just making everything up from page one. I'm glad I didn't think about the pressure. Maybe that would have held me back a bit.
Forget I ever said that. If you ever do another fairy tale retelling, I've never said that. Because now I feel like if you feel pressure, it will be my fault for ever mentioning it.
I'll try not to feel the pressure in future.
So what was the inspiration to kind of go down the darker path when it comes to your retelling? I love a dark kind of retelling because obviously originally they were kind of like warning stories, and then they got kind of more like nice bedtime calming stories, and I really enjoy seeing them go back to kind of the dark side. So was it just a pure enjoyment of the darker side and the wanting to make it kind of fit within the whodunit framework, or was there another reason you kind of went down the darker route?
Oh, it's a number of things. So I'm naturally attracted to dark things within stories, not in real life. I'm quite a happy, upbeat person in real life, but dark stories I definitely like. Pretty much everything I've ever written has been quite dark and quite nasty, so it felt quite natural. Again, not dark and nasty myself. Whenever I've tried to write something fluffier and lighter, I just can't do it as well as other people, and that's totally okay because I can enjoy reading their stuff. So there's that. And there's also what you hinted at, which is that fairy tales just are really naturally dark. And I don't think you can get away from that. And they're kind of ridiculous on some levels, like the woodcutter cutting the wolf open and they're fine. That's an example. But there's just so much nasty stuff about human nature. And, oh, for example, in Hansel and Gretel, which is another fairy tale I like, just kids being abandoned in woods, which is really dark, really bad parenting. And there's a Christmas fairy tale that I know called, I think, The Fir Tree, which is about a Christmas tree musing about life. And it's like burnt at the end because, of course, it's burnt. It's a not very cheerful fairy tale. So I just don't think you can escape darkness, despite the fact that children know these tales. So for me, they totally go hand in hand.
Yeah, definitely. I love the darker side of fairy tales. I think they do say a lot, which brings me on to my next question quite well, actually. Within All the Better to See You, there's a lot of kind of commentary on female roles in society, and kind of, I don't think it's a spoiler to say, it kind of reminds me of kind of what I imagine like the witch trials, the Salem witch trials, that kind of like community almost turning on itself and people within it. Was that always an intention for it to be in the book in that kind of way, to make that commentary?
Oh, absolutely. I'm so glad you picked up on it because basically, from plotting points, this is maybe me going back to my GCSE days, just the idea of the closed community, the wolf attacking people. Is it supernatural? Is it really a wolf? It just gave me massive Crucible vibes, which of course is about the Salem witch trials. And once I had that in my head, it was definitely a really big influence. So I'm not surprised that it comes out on the page tube because it was very much in my head. And I did also want to sneak a bit of, I guess, feminist commentary in there in quite a low-key way that was fitting for the fairy tale, because that's one of my interests and one of the things that I just like to bring into books. So it was, I guess, something for me to work in there in a way that didn't interfere with the story. I'm just so glad you got the witch trials there. That's really made my day.
Yeah, I think it worked really well, as in it added to the story and explained how different, I don't want to give too much away, but why different things happened, and explain things really well without kind of taking it too far away from kind of Red Riding Hood and the wolf and everything. And I definitely think it added to the who done it as well. It kind of added twists and turns and all that kind of thing, whilst
Mm.
commenting on kind of society and kind of feminist issues at the same time. I think it was really well done, and so that's why I wondered if it was kind of like an intentional thread throughout the book.
Oh, sometimes when I read like reviews, even though you're not meant to of books, people pick up on things and I think, oh, I'm really gratified that wasn't there. But if you see that in the book,
Yeah.
that's absolutely amazing. But on this occasion, that absolutely was there. And I guess it's a kind of idea of how one creepy thing or suspicious thing can really snowball and can draw lots of different people into it as well.
Yeah, and I think it really worked to show how in a community something like this wolf would create such kind of fear and confusion and lead to all these things happening and these beliefs, and maybe it's this, maybe it's that, and I found that it worked really well to kind of add another kind of layer to that, um whilst kind of mirroring things that go on in the world. So I really enjoyed it, and I think with it being kind of a fairy tale as well, with fairy tales, they were kind of designed as like warnings to children.
Cautionary.
Yeah, cautionary tales. And I think having that element in there within a fairy tale worked really well to kind of like caution that these things can happen and it's not really right, etc., if you know what I mean. So I really enjoyed
Yeah.
that bit. I enjoyed the
Oh,
whole book,
amazing.
but I really enjoyed that kind of like thread going through it as well. So that leads me on to a very poignant question. Obviously, you love fairy tales. Is Red Riding Hood your favorite fairy tale, or does another one slightly pick it to the pip it?
Pip it to a post.
Yeah, there we go.
We'll go with that. Oh, I feel as though I may be obliged to say, yes, Red Riding Hood is my favourite one, but sorry, all the better to see you. Red Riding Hood is not my favourite fairy tale. It's it's a kind of cheesy naff answer, but my favourite one is Beauty and the Beast. I think because again, the Disney film had a really big influence on me when it came out. When I was at school, your coolness was measured by how many Disney films you owned at home. I was not cool. I only had 5, but Disney, Beauty and the Beast was one of them. And I was one of those little girls who had the classic yellow bell dress. So I think because it had such a sort of formative influence on me as a kid, that is my favorite one. And I love Belle because, again, in the Disney adaptation, she's bookish. She's also brunette, which as a brunette is absolutely great. If I had to pick a second, it's not a fairy tale. I was just thinking on the Disney things. Peter Pan, I really adored, and I used to put posters in my window inviting Peter Pan to come and take me away to Neverland, which sounds a bit creepier than it should sound. I mean, he never did come, but that's not a fairy tale, even as though we tend to think of it under that banner, again because of Disney.
Yeah.
But there's so many other obscure fairy tales that I like as well that I've discovered as an adult just because they're just so freakish and weird.
Yeah, there's definitely some very creepy, strange fairy tales out in the world from everywhere that you can think of. There's fairy tales, and there's just some of them are just so strange. Or like, how did that ever become like a story that people told children?
Yeah,
Like some
so
of them,
inappropriate.
yeah,
So many of them.
yeah. But I really enjoyed Beauty and the Beast, and I think it was mainly because of Belle and her obsession
Yeah.
with books. And I found that really relatable as like a kid, like just walking around. I still do that now, walking around the house kind of with a book open, knocking into things because I'm clumsy and can't put books down.
Because why not? I did used to read books walking out and about, but I got mowed down by a bicycle once. So that habit I have knocked on the head. I guess that's maybe one thing that audiobooks help us out with, that
Yeah,
we don't crash
that,
into bikes.
that's very true. That should be their marketing campaign.
Yes, don't get crashed into by a bike or mown over. Buy an audiobook instead.
Oh dear me. So if you ever did another fairy tale retelling, do you think it would be Beauty and the Beast, or do you think it would be something else?
Oh, so I don't think Beauty and the Beast, because that feels like a fairy tale that's really done. So unless it was a very strange take, like, I don't know, Beauty and the Beast on a spaceship or something, which I have thought about before, and I think it could work quite well, I'd probably leave it well alone. I think especially with things like there was a couple of years ago, the live action version with Emma Watson, it feels like for a few years maybe it needs a rest because it's so well known. I mean, sometimes I guess it's nice to work with something well known because you can play on the reader's assumptions and expectations, as I did with All the Better to See You.
Yeah,
But I
get
think
it
it's
in,
also,
and then
yeah,
whack, this is happening instead.
yeah. So I guess something that's not Beauty and the Beast, I think next time.
Yeah, definitely. I just I adored this. Like
Mm.
retellings, I love a retelling anyway, but the twists and turns and the kind of whodunit framework in this were so good. They kept me hooked. Like I had to read it in two settings, but that was only because I got halfway through, and unless I'd have put like matchsticks in my eyes to keep them open, like I was like falling asleep, like, no, just one more chapter.
Yeah, and you don't want to do that. Just fall asleep over a book that's just sort of ruined. We've all been there.
Yeah, so it is a very good book. How did you kind of, the pacing in this book is incredible. Like, how did you manage to like create such a kind of amazing pace throughout the book? Because it's not too fast, it's not too slow, which I think sometimes you can get in kind of fairy tale retellings because you know the story already, so it can feel like you're already ahead of it. But I think because of the twist on this, maybe it was just right. What do you think about that?
Oh, so I naturally gravitate towards writing things that are too fast paced. So sometimes I need to hold myself back. But I think pacing wise with this book, something that really helped is there's 3 points of view. So you've got Red Riding Hood, you've also got a boy called Ellis, who's the miller's son, and then you've got Red's nemesis, who's called Sabine. And I think when you have three narrators, that allows you to stick to quite a fast pace because they're all doing different things. And if one of the narrators isn't doing that much, you can just flip to a chapter with the other one. And you've got different sources of tension as well, and different subplots that are all bobbing along at the same time. So I guess if any writers are reading this and are thinking, I don't know about my pace, you could try multiple points of view. It's quite, I'm not going to say a cheesy way because that demeans it, but it's a nice way of keeping pace going and flipping between people. So you're never staying too long in someone's narrative where maybe there's a lull or a slow moment. So yeah, I think it's the three narrators that really enabled me to do that. And you think at the start of each of the narrators' sort of arc or growth or story, and then map out how to get to that, and then shuffle the chapters about so they're telling different parts of the story at different points, and then you've kind of got your structure. So that's quite neat.
Yeah. With I love that it was told from kind of multiple points of view. Was that always how you imagined the story kind of developing? Was it always going to have these kind of three characters, each telling their kind of plot storyline in the book, or did it start off as being kind of like just told from Red's perspective? Because I think it really adds something to have those different perspectives going on and seeing the different threads, because obviously with the whodunit in this kind of who is the wolf in a closed community, you're going to have differing points of view and people thinking different things are happening, and to see that kind of weave through worked. I really enjoyed it, so I was just wondering if it was always going to be kind of multiple points of view, or if there was ever a time that it was just going to be told from Red's or someone else's perspective.
It was always going to be multiple point of view. I think if it had just been the story through Red's eyes, it would have really been quite limited and not as intriguing. And I think once the idea was on the table that this book is actually a whodunit, it just made sense to have different narrators who knew different things. Because of course you've got what the narrators each know about what's going on, and then you've got the reader who knows everything that everyone knows. So three narrators just gives you more intrigue to play with. So yeah, it was always the plan.
It definitely worked very well. I loved it because it was like it was so fun to pull out the the clues from each person and kind of like put them all together, knowing that they don't all quite know what you know yet, and seeing if you could figure it out almost faster than they could. I really enjoyed that element, so I just had to ask whether it was always the plan, because I do think it's really interesting to find out about things like that, because I think sometimes I've spoken to some people and they say it's changed as they kind of writ it, but I just think it works so well for this. I couldn't imagine it being told from one point of view, if that makes sense.
Oh, totally. And I think when you've got a book and you think, yes, this story had to be told from multiple points of view, that's when you know that it works. Because I do love multi-point of view books, but there are some that I've read and I just think I'm not really sure that this character's lending anything to this story. So yeah, I know what you mean. And it's also a benefit when you've got multiple points of view, because you can have one who's a horrible person and you can get away with it because there are nicer characters telling the story as well. So that's fun too.
Yeah, I did really like kind of even the nemesis in this tale had kind of hearing it from their point of view made them more relatable, even though they're not the nicest or greatest
So
person in the world. It made it a lot more kind of understandable and relatable and more kind of real, even though it's based in kind of like a fairy tale esque world, obviously. With it being inspired by Red Riding Hood, I think it made kind of what is a fairy tale concept a lot more kind of relatable.
yeah, yeah, I guess with the characters, I often think about them, what they'd be if they were just at a regular school, and Red would be your slightly weird kid who maybe eats odd food in the canteen, listens to alternative music. Ellis would be your kind of classic jock type who's always doing his sporty stuff, and then Sabine would be one of the mean girls, possibly not wearing pink because I don't think it's her color. But I guess that kind of modern idea of who they were kind of took form. So I guess because I've had that in my head, that kind of creates a modern twist a little bit and maybe helps with that relatable angle.
Yeah, I think it really modernized the tale and made it relatable for a lot of readers, because I think fairy tales do have this element of them being so strange and kind of unbelievable when you hear them, like with the elements of like being cut open from a wolf and just being totally fine, that can make it slightly unrelatable. But the fact that you had the different characters telling different points of view and the who done it structure, and the fact that none of the characters were kind of all good or all
No,
bad made it really kind of relatable. So I really enjoyed that element.
Oh, brilliant. You're saying all the right things. This is
Yay! So next up, we have some questions from our YA group in store. Some of these are very easy.
Okay.
Some are very difficult. For example, what is your favorite book? Now, that is a question that always stresses me out because I forget every book I've ever read in the world when somebody asks me that question. But I'm asking you because they've asked me to ask you.
It's so difficult. I also blank with these questions, but then I return to books that I've read again and again and again. And I guess that they must be my favourite books because I'm drawn to them so much. There's one that's quite bad and really obscure, which I'll maybe just park for now, but it's a series that I read as a kid and I've come back to again and again. It's a fantasy series by a US author called Tamara Pierce, who's really quite big now, and you've heard of her because I can see you nodding. It was the Song of the Lioness Quartet, which is about a young girl who wants to become a knight, but knights are all boys. So in a Shakespearean way, she disguises herself as a boy. And they just had such a formative influence on me as a kid. I went to my friend's house and she presented the first one to me. And I just sat down and read it at her house and then just moved straight on to the second one, read it at her house, ignored her all day, took the third and the fourth books home with me. And I just don't know how many times I've read those books. They're really comforting to me and really exciting. So I guess if I can cheat and say a quartet rather than a book.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm allowing that. Yes, I will allow that. Yeah, I think a lot of my favorite books are kind of fantasy ones that I read when I was younger, and a lot of them have kind of strong female characters in there because I think they're what captured my imagination when I was that age, because I wanted to pretend I was like this sword wielding or assassin archer woman that could take on the world. And it was really refreshing to kind of see strong women in books, because I think before that point and before I picked up certain fantasy books like those ones, it was kind of, they were more focused on male points of view, whereas I think that's what really captured. So I agree totally with that, the answer to that.
Amazing.
That's a very
I'm glad it's not just me who had it in their head that they were going to be this super person with abilities to fire bows and all of that.
I still think it now, when in reality, which actually leads us on to another question, I would be terrible in this scenario. So if you could travel to any world, any book world, which would it be? Now, I have quite a few that I'd like to visit, but I don't think I'd last 5 minutes in any of them.
Yes, I have this as well, because some, I'm thinking of, I guess, series books here. Some of those worlds I would not want to go near at all because I just wouldn't last. I mean, I was, before the last series, quite a big Game of Thrones fan, but would I want to go to Westeros? No, I wouldn't, because I would die in 5 minutes, definitely.
Yeah.
And I don't really know if I'd want to go to Tortall, which is Tamara Pierce's world, because again, I think I'd just die and it sounds really pretty miserable. And then I guess if I'm thinking about a lot of the contemporary books that I really like, that would kind of just be like inhabiting this world. But something, again, going back to me as a kid, I loved schoolgirl stories. So Mallory Towers, St. Clair's, especially the Chalet School. I would have loved to have gone to the Chalet School universe, eat all of the food they eat, you know, gorgeous Austrian food, travel up the mountains, you know, lots of handsome doctors wandering around, which is, you know, one of her things in the series. So yeah, I guess I'm going to say chalet school / boarding school universes, just because it was my dream. I don't know if it's still my dream, but again, I'm going back to my inner child here, so that's what I'll go with. Also, I wouldn't die in a boarding school, which is a plus.
It's a definite plus. Yeah, I think a lot of the worlds that like I most enjoy reading about, I would not last 50 seconds in. I don't really think, like, I really love Priory of the Orange Tree is my favourite book. Would not last 5 minutes in that world. Love anything by like there's the Bone Shard Emperor comes out today, and I loved the Bone Shard Daughter. I love that world.
Yes.
But no, I would not last 2 seconds in that world. It would be awful to visit. Same with like Lord of the Rings and all these like big fantasy worlds. I'd love to see them, like maybe float around them
from afar
and just see what's happening, but not actually be required
be
to
there,
be involved in the world at all.
I'm very much on the same page with you. It's safer in a boarding school just eating lots of cakes and jam buns.
Yeah, definitely. I'm with you on that one. Another question that they have asked is, have you always seen yourself as an author, or when you were smaller, did you imagine yourself being something else?
Oh, the answer to that is just yes in enormous capital letters, fluorescent, lit up, crossing the screen. I've always written from goodness knows how young. In my parents' loft, there's a suitcase. It's got all of my writing notebooks in. So when I was in year 6, my friend and I had a girl in our class who, for some random reason, we really hated. So we started writing a satire about her and a boy in our class, which was weirdly a kind of shipping satire because we were 10 and we were like, she fancies him, he fancies her, ha ha ha. So we started writing a satire about them. And like 6 years later, I have 36 A4 notebooks, some of which are about 400 pages, about this epic satire story, and loads of little spin-off notebooks, which are other characters in the story's secret diaries. And that was mainly what I did between the ages of 10 and 16. And then from that, I wrote other things that weren't crazy satires with thousands of characters. So with kind of start like that, it's maybe not a surprise that I've pursued writing, and it's a thing that I've always wanted to do.
Yeah, definitely. That's amazing. I kind of want to see those notebooks, I'm not gonna lie. I feel like that would be really interesting.
Each time I go to my parents, I always think I need to dig these out and take pictures, and one time I will. Not gonna lie, my handwriting, it's not the best. I illustrated them as well, so they're like illustrated books.
Oh,
I'm okay at art. The illustrations aren't too bad for like an 11-year-old. I will dig them out at some point and share them with the world.
I definitely think you should do that. I think that would be so interesting to kind of see where it started and then where it is now. I think that would be incredible. The next question's a pretty big one, and that is, what motivates you to write?
I think it's because I can't imagine not doing that. And whenever I've gone through periods, even say a week or something when I'm not writing, I'm basically not happy. And it is pretty much a joke with my family and everyone who knows me that if I'm in a bad mood, it's probably relating to not having written something or come up against like a plot block that I'm trying to solve. Yeah, my moods are very much tied to my writing, so which is so sad to admit. I'm sorry to my husband and family. This is very much true. So I guess I just couldn't not do it, and that's pretty much what motivates me. And also, I read things and hear things and just think that would make a great story, or there's things I get really angry about that I want to try and fuel into a book, whether that's an issue or a feeling. So all of those things together, I guess, come and make me want to do this every day.
I think that's amazing though, that you do it just because you can't not. It's that kind of passion to do it. And I think the fact that obviously you say like your emotions are tied to your writing a lot, I think that comes across really well in your books, in that they're
Thank you.
so emotionally charged, and there's so much kind of depth of emotion and characters and things that it makes total sense that kind of your emotions are tied into your writing, if that makes
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can write yourself into quite an emotional sort of state. When I wrote a fantasy story for my friend when we were about 16, and I made her cry with it. And it was honestly one of my proudest moments because she felt what I was feeling when I wrote it. So yeah, I'm sorry, Crystal, I didn't mean to do that.
I did really, just a little bit. You're like, I meant to make you cry a little bit.
A little bit, but maybe not cry like that. But I'm sure she's over it now. It was a long time ago.
The next one is always an interesting question, and that is, if you could bring any character to life from All the Better to See You, which would it be?
Oh my goodness. Well, it's certainly not the wolf. That would be a terrible idea. Oh, this is interesting because the characters that some of the ones I like best, I'm not actually sure I would like to have them brought to life. I mean, I loved writing Sabine's point of view, but she's horrible and she wouldn't like me. So why would I want her?
Should be no fun to hang out with, would you?
Yeah, she'd just be awful. And while Ellis is a really pleasant, nice young man, I don't think I'd have very much to say to him because he'd be out doing all of his active stuff, or I don't know, trying to ride horses or talk about flowers. So I guess Red would probably be the nicest character to hang out with. And I could maybe teach her a few things about baking. That would help. So yeah, I guess it would be Red. And also, I'm not a very outdoorsy person, and she is. So maybe she could teach me more about that. I've always wanted to be more outdoorsy. So yeah, I think Red, to give a predictable kind of answer.
I would go with Red as well, actually.
Yeah.
For similar kinds of reasons. One, I think she's the only one that would probably really want to hang out with me. I think Ellis would be too busy doing everything. Sabine wouldn't like me.
She doesn't like anyone.
Because she doesn't like anyone. But I think Red would be really interesting to hang around with and just see kind of the world through her eyes. And I agree, it would be really nice for her to take me out into nature, because I think she'd be the nice kind of person to go to nature with, because I think some people are so like, we're off on a hike, and that is not me, and we're gonna walk very fast and get to this hill,
be very serious about this.
Yes, whereas I think Red would be more like calming and like, oh, let's just
let me show you my world. And I'd also like to say to her, cheer up, Red, it will be okay.
Yeah,
cheer up,
you will get through it.
Yeah,
have a cake.
Yes, a nice cake, a malted bun, which I've written so much about, and I don't really even know what malted buns are. I'm clearly going to find this out.
Yeah. So that kind of wraps up all the questions. So if you would like to kind of let us all know where we can find you, I will add all the information to kind of the description box, which should be below if you're watching this, down here somewhere. I always feel very strange pointing to things that aren't there yet. I'm like
almost like kind of disco arms.
Yeah, it's like a little dance that I do at the end of videos now.
Yeah, well, my most active place is Twitter. That's just at Gina Blaxill. There's no H in Blaxill. My life has been haunted by people adding an H in there. There is no H. I am also on Instagram, and I do have a website, ginablaxill.co.uk. But Twitter is really the best place, and there's daily musings from me, and there's also information about upcoming books and all of that kind of stuff, and lots of cat pictures as well. So cats.
How much can you tell us about your next book? Because I'm very excited about it.
I can say quite a lot now because it got announced last Friday. I've been sitting on it for such a long time. So the next book is completely different from All the Better to See You. It's called You Can Trust Me. It is a YA thriller, maybe at the older end of the thriller spectrum, so kind of 13 plus. And it is quite dark. It's definitely got a lot of feminist stuff in it. And essentially there is a mysterious drowning at a teenage party in a manor house. The drowning occurs in an ancient witches' pool where lots of witches have been drowned in the past. And our main character, Alana, who I realised shares the name of Alana in the Tamara Pierce books, which I've done completely unconsciously in some form of worship. she's our main character and she wants to get to the bottom of all of this. So there's a lot of stuff about privilege, toxic masculinity, people protecting each other. So it is a thriller, but there's a lot of, I guess, issues that are looked at head on and given a lot of screen space, page space.
Yeah.
So more than a thriller, if I can say that. And
Yeah.
I'm really happy with the beautiful front cover, partly because it matches my walls, which is great.
It's so pretty. When I saw it and I saw the announcement, it was just the text bit to start with that you'd written, and then I scrolled down and I saw it and I was like, because it is one of those book covers that's just, it's beautiful. It's such a gorgeous looking cover, but
I'm so happy.
Thriller vibes. It's still like, you still feel like there's something that's going to be happening. It's still
brilliant.
It's that, but it is.
Yeah, because it's not just your kind of, I mean, I love, when I say generic thriller, I love generic thrillers, but it's more than that. And I think they've got that across in the front cover amazingly, and it's going to be a bit shiny and gold. So I'm just so overjoyed because I could not imagine what the front cover of the book looked like. So yeah, that's brilliant.
It's a gorgeous cover, and I can't wait until it is in my hands because I need it.
I also need it, and I know what's inside it, but I definitely need to feel it in my hands and coordinate outfits with it and all of that stuff.
Definitely.